and welcome to today on our Plan B Masterclass. Thank you for joining us. I am Joe, and I'll be here to direct the conversation today. If you're in Portugal already, you're planning a move or simply exploring your options, you're in the right place. We've put together today this team of experts. We'll go through currencies, moving to Portugal, lifestyle, and most importantly, tax. Tax and the moving climates. So I won't give everybody the full breakdown, but I'll introduce Dan, Rachel, Maya, and Zeev. Thank you for joining us today. In a few minutes, I'll let you say a little bit about yourself. I won't do your bios any justice. So on that note, let's dive into it, and we'll start with Dan. If you give me a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go round, and then we'll get on with the questions and the discussion for today.
Yeah, hi Joe. Thanks for the introduction. Hi everyone. My name is Dan Henderson. I'm a partner at Blevins Franks in the Algarve, Portugal. So Blevins Franks, cross-border tax financial planning specialist. So our job is to make sure that anybody exiting typically the UK, we've got clients from other jurisdictions, they do so in a tax efficient fashion. There's always some useful tax planning opportunities that we're going to explore a little bit today. But our role is to make sure they sequence that move as tax effectively as possible.
And Rach, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rachel, currency specialist at GC Partners, and I help people to basically save money when they are converting funds from overseas.
Thank you very much. And Maya, a little bit about yourself.
Me? Well, I'm Maya de Filippo. I'm the co-founder and business partner of Joe, the buyer's agent in Portugal. And what we do is help people with their real estate acquisition in Portugal.
Thank you. And Zeev, last but not least.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, everyone. Zeev Fisher. I'm a tax lawyer. I'm admitted in the UK, Ireland, Israel, and of course, Portugal, and also as an IRS enrolled agent in the US. I've been doing cross-border tax planning and implementation for the last 2 decades. My firm is called Fresh Portugal. It's now the largest expat legal consultancy in Portugal, or at least one of the largest. Happy to talk about taxes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And on that note, we'll dive straight in. And again, it's back to you, Dan. With the UK's fiscal landscape and the up-and-coming budget, it's drive some real uncertainty into the market. Can you give us the key policy areas of anyone with cross-border interest that should be paying attention? What areas should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, it's quite a wide question, Joe. I mean, it's been a tough few weeks, tough few months for the government. They basically got to appease three stakeholders in the UK public. You've got their own Labour MPs, and of course the markets. And we've seen it in the last week. I think unless there's a sort of credible fiscal plan that comes from the budget, then we'll see UK gilt yields spike further, and the impact of that on a sort of fiscal level means that the cost of repaying that debt to the UK will just increase. So I think for investors, they're probably looking at the gilt market quite closely, and I'm sure Rachel will come onto it. But from a currency point of view, we've seen sterling weaken quite a lot this year already. So that typically has quite a big implication for those moving cross-border, because they want to understand what their money is going to be worth. So fiscally, they're probably the two areas that you're going to be interested to follow. And then the policy decisions, and what the Labour government seems to have done is throw these bombs out there in the public domain and see how big they explode. There's lots in the press about what might or might not happen. I think it's safe to say that real estate holders in the UK will be caught. So whether it's this mansion tax on high value properties, this stamp duty, whether it's council tax increases for high band properties, and they're even talking about national insurance contributions for those with rental income on top of obviously income tax. So I think if you own a situ asset, they tend to be the ones that get caught. Pensions are also in the limelight for the wrong reasons, but I think they're likely to be hit again. So talk about a maximum level of pension commencement lump sum, that tax-free element of pension, only 40,000. There's already exit taxes on pensions. They're going to be part of people's estates from April 2027. So pensions might be in the spotlight. But I think the one that maybe worries us all is the exit tax, or the threat of an exit tax. The outflow of millionaires from the UK this year alone has been about 20,000. And the UK government can't stop people leaving, but they can certainly make it more difficult for them to access their assets. So I think that's one, if I'm looking in the cross-border space, I'd be probably most concerned about and keeping my eye on.
20,000, I didn't think the number was quite so high, actually. Last I read, it wasn't quite that high, so it obviously shows the flow of people, doesn't it? It certainly does. And yeah, just I'll bring you in there, Zeev, as well, with the potential changes. What do you think are going to be the most relevant for those that are considering a move?
Well, I think they have ruled out exit tax at this point after so many people have already left. But yeah, I don't know how conclusively they ruled it out, but it seems to be out, at least for now. But the previous budget was supposed to be the last one with tax increases. So we'll see what happens in the future. But yeah, it does seem like everything is up for grabs, and the taxes are going up. I think anything that touches on the cross-border space is the most relevant one. At the moment, there's very strong incentives to leave, and particularly to come to Portugal, because Portugal has a very good package that a lot of people don't know about. But yeah, what precisely? It really depends. We'll have to see the budget and see what it does. I don't think there will. And any of the most important rules, such as exemption on dividends paid to foreign tax residents, for example, will change. I think the main things will stay as they are.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've got a question, Dan, because you were talking about a tax on high value property, but obviously high value has a different meaning for different people. What do you think they would say about what do they mean by high value properties? Because I think the sentiment we're trying to understand is normally when we talk about leaving and a tax rate, we think, oh, it's for the uber rich. But I think the situation where we are at the moment is not necessarily just after the uber rich, and they normally have their fares already in place, and it's more for the common people. So high value property, what is this? 1 million, 500,000?
Yeah, and the council tax thresholds and the stamp duty thresholds are slightly different, is what's been mooted. So anywhere from 500,000 council tax could be affected. I mean, as Zeev said, I mean, we're in the dark. We don't know exactly where these boundaries are going to fall, but you're absolutely right. When you talk about people that don't really consider themselves uber wealthy, but the fact property prices increased so radically, so dramatically in the UK, it brings a lot of people potentially into that tax. So I think the mansion tax or the stamp duty is going to be probably 2.5 million plus. But the council tax bandings could affect lower value properties.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a very valid point, actually, Dan. And a lot of the discussions we're having today are based on maybes and, with the up and coming budget. And the whole point of this is to try and get, what kind of mindset should people be getting into? What strategies should they be adopting in planning the future finance?
Yeah, I think you can only start doing that once you've made a decision to move. So whether the budget is going to be the one thing that instigates that decision or not is difficult to know. I mean, I've got this saying, I think I've done on a previous podcast, don't let the tax tail wag the lifestyle dog. So yeah, you move from the UK, it shouldn't be driven by tax. As Zeev said, hopefully it's by lifestyle. Portugal's a fantastic place to live. There are some really great financial tax planning packages that are available. But that to me is the starting point. So once you've made your decision, yeah, I'm gonna leave the UK, move to Portugal, you then need that roadmap in place, and that roadmap obviously needs to consider what your tax outlook is going to look like. So you've got to obviously consider the assets that you hold at the moment, the tax structures that you hold at the moment. Do they work in Portugal? Do they not? What needs to happen as you exit? What needs to happen as you enter Portugal? So these are all the factors that I put together I describe it as a roadmap to sequence that move as effectively as.
How quickly, from the moment you said, okay, we're done, that's just too much, how quickly can you move your affairs? I mean, are we talking a year-long planning? Can it be 3 months?
Well, I mean, from a residency point of view, you can move when you like. Both Portugal and the UK split their tax years, but you've got to be very careful with residency rules, as I'm sure Zeev will comment on. But yeah, so the move can happen very, very quickly, but then you've got to consider all the assets and potentially if you need a visa, how long that process might take. So you're actually able to reside legally in Portugal. So Zeev, I don't know if you've got any comments on that in terms of how long that visa process is taking.
Maybe a point on planning just before that. So I don't think planning necessarily starts when you decide specifically to move to Portugal. There's a bigger question of whether you intend to move anywhere at any point. And if the answer to that is yes, and you know that for example, you know that you want to move in 10 years' time, that changes how you structure, or it should change how you structure your affairs. So yeah, things are changing all the time. But if for example you have a company, or you're self-employed but you could have a company, and you know that there will be a point at which you will be exiting the country, and be able to take money accumulated within that company without necessarily paying UK dividend tax, that's when planning is already relevant. So I think there's this overarching question of whether you're ever going to move anywhere, or if you know for a fact that you're going to stay. And then a much more imminent where you kind of decided on a destination and you want to see how you structure things in the best way towards that destination. So yeah, I mean, for me, tax planning it's never too early. It's always only too late.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I completely agree with Zeev. From a currency exchange point of view, a proactive strategy is key. As Dan has mentioned as well, Zeev, the UK economy is shaky, and in terms of the British pound, for example, this year has been very interesting. It fell to multi-month lows as a fiscal uncertainty, tax hike fears, and dovish Bank of England signals continue to undermine investors' confidence. So right now, the UK investors or anyone that is planning on buying a property in Portugal are quite exposed to currency swings. The earlier you start planning and mapping out any kind of potential payments that you might have to do in the future, the earlier the better, as Zeev was pointing out. With weaker UK job data, that's something that it's been since COVID times, and the political uncertainty and the potential rate cuts ahead, sterling could also remain under pressure. So that means that an early planning is required to be able to mitigate the currency risk exposure that anyone might have when planning their move to Portugal eventually.
It's interesting because I think when you talk about risk, most people never plan for risk; they react to risk, and that I think that's the overarching purpose of that. That call. We see it with our clients on the real estate. There's a lot of shall we, shan't we? Should we wait? Is it going to be a crash? Are we paying over the odds? Are we going to wake up from that bad dream and actually Rachel Reeves won't be that nasty? And you can see there's really a lot of people who just don't know where to look and becoming very undecisive. But at the end of the day, you can only make decision based on what is today, what is expected. I know. We hear it. People, but maybe there'll be an early election, and then reform will come in, and all of these will be cancelled, and everything's going to be okay. Again, if, and I think you can only base your decision on what it is, today, and risk is always that they're like insurance. You purchase insurance in the hope that you're not going to have to, use it. So you prepare for the risk so you don't have to face it. I would say.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for that. And I'll go back to Dan, just to bring it back to one thing. I know we're talking about a lot of uncertainties, but one thing that is certain is inheritance tax in Portugal. So could you give us a little bit on how that would affect and how you would incorporate that in maybe tax planning for somebody or within the move?
Yeah, I mean, well, the good news about Portugal is there's no death duties in inheritance tax like we know coming from the UK. And there was a significant shift, or actually it took effect on the 6th of April this year. So by statute, by law, now if you've been non-UK tax resident for more than 10 of the last 20 years, you're not inside the scope of UK inheritance tax any longer, other than UK assets. So for those clients that we've got that have been here for a sustained period of time, i.e. more than 10 years, we've now got certainty in terms of where their estate planning situation is. And that does form a key part of what we do. Ideally, a lot of our clients have reasonable net worth, and they want to establish a clear and tax efficient succession path for their beneficiaries. I don't know if anybody's been caught up in multi-jurisdictional probate, but it's messy. It's not very nice for the beneficiaries. So as much as we can do to ease that path and obviously be as tax efficient as possible, the better. But the great news is now we've got certainty in terms of how the picture looks if you're from the UK moving to Portugal. So that's great news for us as financial planners.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you very much. Zeev, question for you with the key steps and the big pitfalls that people will hit when transitioning between Portugal and the UK and Portugal.
Okay, so you move from the UK to Portugal. It normally starts with applying for a visa. Most people will apply for either a D7 or a D8 visa. D7 is the passive income one. D8 is the digital nomad one. There are other visas as well. There's the golden visa that allows you not to move, but to come whenever you please. For most visas, the typical process takes a few months. So you apply in the UK. It takes 2-3 months to have the first appointment, and then you come to Portugal and you have some time to convert your visa to a residence permit. That still works fine. It's delayed, but everything in Portugal is a little bit delayed. So that's pretty straightforward. And once you have moved, then you are expected, or you need to inform the tax authorities that you have changed your tax residency. Now, a lot of people are asking us, when does tax residency actually start? It's a pretty complicated and nuanced question. It's not very straightforward. There's legally and practically. Legally, tax residency starts when you either have a main home, so a main residence where you live, or when you spend 183 days within a particular 12 months stretch, but starting from the first day that these 183 days started. That's what the law says anyway. In practice, people, once they move, they have 60 days to go to the tax authorities and tell them I've moved, which is done by changing the address that's associated with your NIF number, your tax number. And that's where the authorities, that's where the count actually starts. But because there is a legal definition, then the tax authorities will sometimes backdate what you've told them, and they will pick another date which is earlier and more comfortable for them. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. So on a practical level, usually your tax residency starts from your when your NIF was associated with a Portuguese address. But because legally it might not be the same day, there could be a backdating exercise. Now, all of this is, I mean, it doesn't really matter that much because you just start paying taxes in Portugal from that date onwards. But there are a few really important things to pay attention to, both on the Portuguese side and on the UK side. On the Portuguese side, the main issue is that Portugal runs a tax benefits program. It used to run the NHR, which everyone knew. It was very straightforward. You just came and you ticked the box, you applied, and you had your NHR status, and it would exempt most of your foreign income streams and give you a preferential rate of 20% on your Portuguese domestic income streams. Now this has been changed. There's been a lot of criticism of this. The previous government decided that this program ran its course, and they've changed it to a new program called DFISI by the government, or some people call it NHR 2.0. Roughly the same benefit minus retirement income. So pensions are no longer covered by this. I think probably a lot of Dan's clients fall into that demographic that relies heavily on pension income. My clients, interestingly, not so much. Right? Most of our clients are working people, but we also have retirees. So the retirement income doesn't fall into this, but everything else does. And interestingly, capital gains from securities for people coming from the UK are also covered by the new program, which wasn't the case with the previous program. So it's, in some senses, it's better. And specific demographics, for example, founders of tech startups that are about to exit, precisely the sort of people that are leaving to Dubai, can achieve the same outcome in Portugal without going to Dubai and flying up. Some people like that sort of stuff. But if you like the Portugal culture and the proximity and the fact that it's in Europe, then you can get the same package essentially as an exited founder under the new program. It's complicated from a qualification perspective. So most advisors here wouldn't know how to qualify people under the new program, because you need a qualifying position in a Portuguese company, but it is resolvable. So this is our long story short. So the biggest issue that on the Portuguese side is missing out on applying, because you need to apply in the same year that you become a tax resident. If you don't apply in the same year that you become a tax resident, you cannot apply ever again. So if you arrive and become a tax resident in November, for example, and you don't apply for the new program and you don't meet the qualifying criteria, then it's gone and the program would not work for you ever. So that's a pretty big miss. It's quite similar to not applying for the NHR. On time, that a lot of people missed out on the opportunity to apply for the NHR, and then they were illegally rejected. But in this case, it would be legal to reject people from the new program if they don't apply. And that's combined with the backdating risk. If you come to Portugal in November and change your tax residency in January, but actually you're legally a tax resident in November, you might want to apply for the new program in November and not in January, because if you're backdated, then you've actually missed the deadline. So that's on the Portuguese side. UK side is simpler, actually. There are two main risks coming from the UK. One risk is that if you benefit from the exemptions on passive income that you take out of UK companies, specifically dividends, because a lot of people sit on a lot of money within their companies, and once they move, they can take them out. But if you take dividends out of a UK company and you go back within the first 5 tax years after you moved, you need to pay in the UK as if you've never left, retroactively for everything. So that is a major risk, and the same goes if you're in a split year in the UK. So if you moved before April and you paid yourself dividends in a year where you were partially tax resident in the UK, the exemption does not apply and you need to pay dividend tax in the UK. So normally you have to wait until that April, take the dividends then, and make sure you don't go back to the UK within the first 5 years unless you're willing to pay the extra money on the dividends. Hopefully, you've had this is covers the whole thing. And apologies for.
Well, I think Zeev, you've answered most of my questions without me actually answering them. So you ran through quite a bit there, and it sounds like that the NHR 2.0, as we've been calling it, certainly is almost a masterclass on itself. It sounds quite complex, and that could be something for another day for sure. Just another question that you did raise, or I've just thought, is there ever a point where there's a double taxation between the two countries, where you would be paying tax in both countries at the same time, or not?
You're not supposed to. So there is a treaty that protects you, which adds. I mean, I haven't even touched on that. It adds another layer of complexity because if you're usually advised by local accountants, both in the UK and in Portugal, they tend to know the rules. If they're good accountants, they tend to know the domestic resident tax residency rules quite well. But they don't understand the treaties because they don't do cross-border tax planning every day. So you can be, for example, a tax resident legally in both the UK and Portugal under the domestic rules of both countries. But then there is a mechanism in the treaty called the tiebreaker rules, which you then have to go to the tiebreaker rules to figure out where you're actually a tax resident, and then you only end up being a tax resident in one of the countries. So if you spend, for example, more than 3 months in the UK, but most of the year in Portugal, in most cases you will end up being a Portuguese tax resident, although your UK accountant might be quite adamant that you are a tax resident in the UK, and they will be wrong. Because the assessment is a dual assessment. First, you assess the local tax residency rules, and then you have to go to the treaty and see what it says. And then the treaty also defines where you pay your taxes first. So the way treaties work is that you pay the higher rate of tax of the two countries, but you have one country where you pay first, and then the other country, you use that as credit, and you pay the remainder if there is any remainder to pay. So the outcome of the treaty is that you pay the higher rate, but never twice, or it's supposed to be never twice unless there is an accident. But you pay the higher rate, but never twice. And the treaty tells you for each income stream where you pay first and where you pay second, and it's different for each income stream. So a lot of people think they can choose where to pay their taxes. Oh, I've already paid in the UK, I don't need to pay in Portugal. It doesn't work like that. You pay your taxes where the treaty says you need to pay your taxes.
And if there is a discrepancy and you do end up paying too much tax in one country or too little in another, will the government sort it out, the tax be sorted out between them, or will one country simply return the overpaid tax to you and then you sort it out on the other end?
We chase it on behalf of clients. The only situation where countries sort it out between themselves is if there's a disagreement on where you're a tax resident under the tiebreaker rules. So you need to go through this very long process of if you end up being a tax resident in both, then first you look at where most of your economic ties are, where you live, where you're a citizen, and only if it's still inconclusive after you pass through all of these, there's a mechanism whereby the countries talk to each other. And it does happen, it's just very, very rare. In all other cases, if you've overpaid in one country, you need to file a corrected tax return and go chase the money. And they will give it to you eventually, but it might cost you more to get it back.
I like that eventually part.
There's one thing I wanted to point out, because when I spoke with Zeev the first time, he made that comment, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to repeat that comment on his behalf. And he said, and we said with our clients, most people, when they're moving here, they're going to look for an accountant. And they're going to say, oh, I need an accountant to manage my affairs. But what we found, by experience, that the local accountants, I'm going to try to find the right words to put these. So I'm not going to offend anyone.
Don't go upsetting anybody.
Don't go upset anyone. I know I'm not going to be French about it. Some will know better than others. Let's put it this way. The local landscape, but very few really understand cross-border. And I think this is where having a tax lawyer is very important, because that's their specialty. And one thing, again, I'm going back to what I said to Dana earlier on about it's not just for the uber rich. People think, oh, tax lawyer, they're super expensive. I'm not earning enough money. It's all about efficiency. And I think it's important to bring that. So I wanted to make that point. And the second thing I wanted to ask, and both to Zeev and Dan, and I'm going to pretend I'm in the audience, and I don't really know how the things work. So I'm going to make an assumption, and you're going to tell me whether I'm correct or not. So I'm in the UK, I want to move, and I've heard of Blevins and Franks, I've heard of tax lawyer, but I don't really understand what is the difference between the two. And do they work hand in hand? Do I contact one first or the other? And I've tried to look at putting in a simpler way. And I would say Dan would probably work on the structure, the product, the different way you would strategize. And then Zeev would say, well, from a legal standpoint, across the countries, yes, it works or not. Am I correct in that assumption or not? Just for people to understand what would be, who do they contact and for what matters, and how do you both work together?
Yeah, Zeev, I can't take a lead on that. So, I mean, what Blevins Franks do, we don't do the tax compliance or reporting. We don't do the visa process. We don't do the immigration side that Zeev and his team would do. I mean, our job's basically to make sure that somebody on their Portuguese tax return is legally as minimal as possible. So we do what I describe as strategic financial planning. So when you're looking at the exit from the UK, the transition to Portugal, we'll put that strategic tax plan together to make sure you exit as effectively as possible. Anything in the cross-border space that needs doing, and then when you arrive, you structure everything as well as you possibly can. Sometimes that results in a financial product at the end of it, of course, and an investment strategy to go with it. And then I can't speak for Zeev, but I think his role's more also, I think the tax planning, I think maybe there is a bit of crossover there, but what he does is all the immigration planning as well. So that's, for us, that's still a critical part. We need somebody like a Zeev in our network of advisors to make sure that anybody sequencing a move does it in the right way with the right visa and it gets the right outcome.
So yeah, I completely agree. Maya, there's very little overlap. I mean, we don't do any financial planning. We don't know which shares to buy, which products to buy, what's effective and what's not. We don't understand money. We can invoice, but that's as far as it goes. We're on the legal side. We do work with a lot of financial advisors and financial planners, and hand in hand, where they do financial planning, and they obviously very competent in understanding the taxation in both countries. They instruct us for specific things. For example, if they wanted to, if Dan had a client that needed to apply for NHR 2.0, they will need us to do that.
Okay, understand.
They will know what it means, but they will need us to execute. And is
No,
that fair?
Absolutely, yeah, spot on.
Okay. Well, thank you. I wanted to clarify that point because I know that sometimes it's, for common people like us who don't always understand how things work. My understanding is we need a Dan and we need a Zeev, basically, and you will both work on the, strategy and get us to the best point. So thank you.
So I have a much easier question probably for you, Zeev, this time, and that is, if anybody is looking to move in this year, next year, when should they start seeking advice? I think the answer is pretty simple, but I'll let you answer it anyway.
Yeah, as soon as possible. It's never too early.
That's it. Well, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on now, and Maya, a question for you, and that is again quite simple. Why is Portugal so popular, and why does it remain so attractive?
Well, I think there's many things to it, and it's interesting because this panel is with 5 of us. We all foreigners in Portugal, so it'll be interesting to see whether you agree with what I've my kind of summary of why Portugal is still so attractive. And I think first of all, it's not one thing. It's the ability to strike a balance between different aspects of life. Quality of life, safety, and the accessibility, So the fact that it works for different profiles. So if you're a retiree or semi-retirees, it works for you. If you are families or remote professionals, it can also work for you. The second point that is always quite striking for me for Portugal is that for such a small country, you really have a variety of lifestyles. So if you're still very cosmopolitan and you like urban lifestyle, you'll have Lisbon or you'll have Porto. But if you want to feel like you're on holidays all year, then you will come to, you'll come to the Algarve and you'll have a different rhythm of life. But even within the Algarve, and I think whether it's Dan, Joe, and Rachel, because we are the three of us based in the Algarve, even within such a small geographical space, you've got different lifestyle. So if you want, rugged and a bit more nature, you'll go to the west. If you want something a bit more, I would say, expat living, you'll be more central. If you want something a little bit more Portuguese or Portuguese lifestyle, maybe you'll go more towards the east. And I find that quite interesting. And there's also the affordability. If you compare capital to capital, so Lisbon to London, you've got Lisbon is on average about 40% cheaper than London. So that makes it a good proposition. But then you've got the fundamentals. Portugal repeatedly, when you've got these reports that come year on year, it ranks among the safest country in the world. Healthcare is solid, whether you go through the the public system or you go through the private options. And then even if you go through private option and you need to acquire private health insurance, it's not crazy expensive. Another important thing is the level of English, and it's remarkably high in comparison with the neighboring country. I'm French, I can speak for France, but I know a lot of us have been, going to Italy or to Spain, which are the competitors of, Portugal, for a place in, the sun. The level of English here is really, really good. So if you're looking to move, it makes the move easier, makes the earlier year easy. And then I would say also people are generally welcoming and patient, with newcomers. Specifically for the UK, the accessibility is really good. You've got over 60 flights from the UK per week, and about 2.5 hours, from the UK. And then I think there's something that is quite unquantifiable, and these good time factors, something that Portugal has, and some will call it the traditional way or this old-fashioned way, but you're still in a country that values community, people, where you can eat well, the products are good. It's not perfect. I think, we can, the slow pace of life sometimes can become a bit, frustrating for some of us. But I think, generally speaking, it ticks a lot of the boxes.
Yeah, it's always one of my phrases, isn't it? That when people ask me what's my favorite thing about Portugal, I'd always tell them the same thing, and it's so laid back. It's great when you're relaxed and chilled and everything's working fine, but when you want something doing and everyone's so relaxed and fine about it, it can become a little bit of an annoyance as well. But I mean, it's a small price to pay. Yeah. So I'll move on to the next question, Maya, and that is, where would you say that the Portuguese real estate market is right now?
Okay, well, the first thing I would say is I think we've passed the boom years. But people sometimes think that because we passed the boom years, we may be in a weak market, and we're not. What we're seeing is we're transitioning towards more of a mature, selective market, and we've got strong fundamentals, From 2020, I would say, to about 2022, we went through a really genuine boom. After COVID, and I think it concerns some of us. People reassess their lifestyle. Remote work become more normal. Interest rates were low. I mean, you practically were getting, free money. The golden visa as well was still active. So we had a really increase in price very sharply. I think for that period, we're talking about plus 40% in real estate prices. And I think if I'm looking at my notes, in 2022, we had records selling 160,000 transactions. But we've got to put it into a context. It was a very emotional market. Lots of FOMO. And I think for those of us who were in real estate at that time, we had very little patience. People would come in, whether it was for the golden visa, they'd buy anything. They wouldn't really question prices. They wouldn't really question, the quality of the product. But then since 2023, things have changed. Interest rates have moved up, financing becoming a little bit more expensive. The transaction volumes have gone down, and that's a fact. I think in comparison 2022 and 23, we lost about 20% of transaction. But what is really important is the market didn't collapse. We've all heard it. Oh, we're going to have a market correction. Just hasn't happened. What happened is the markets continue to go up, but just at a slower pace. And that's just a sign of a structural shortage market. And I think that's the story of the Portugal market. So the demands have cooled, but because supply is so tight, and constrained, price don't really move so much. 2024, we had a rebound by 9%. So, I'm giving you a bit of fact because there's lots of ESA on, in the market. And I think this is also sometimes blocking people from making the right decisions. And we are in a country that is not very transparent in terms of getting data. So what we've seen in the rebound in 2024 is we had less FOMO, but we still have a market, a flow of transaction. Now we don't have the data for 2025. We'll only get that next year. But what we can tell you from being on the ground is, yes, there are less buyers, but there's also a lot less properties. So the market is still moving slowly. We see a few price correction, but usually it's either on proposition are not very good or properties were just overpriced because people just make up some prices. So you could ask, but if the boom is over, why are property continuing to go up? And I think it's because now we're moving to a market who has some sort of depth and resilience. You've got still healthy volumes, but the big issue is supply. And it's always been supply, and it will always be supply. You've got very limited construction in places everyone wants. Lisbon, Porto, the coastal Algarve. You're talking about a very small country to start with. And then you talk about the areas where people want to be, which is not the reality in the middle of the Alentejo. So geographically speaking, the amount of land available for construction. Then you add planning and licensing that is very slow. I know they try to make changes to it, but honestly, we don't really see it on the market. Construction costs have shooted up, I would say about 30 to 40%, since COVID. So that really create a floor on the price. And I think for people looking to come to Portugal who are worried that maybe they're paying at the top of the curve, this is very good news. It means that, even if you end up having some market correction, you're never going to have massive drops because of that supply issue.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing, just touching on that, Maya, is how long things take even when you have your licensing and everything in place.
Yes.
We always advise our clients that are looking for plots and want to build. Well, for starters, don't do it. Unless you really know that it isn't going to take you. People will tell you, oh, it's 18 months. It's never 18 months. If someone was to ask us and say 3 years, I'd still say you're closer, but it might not be finished in that period of time. So there is all of this, and that adds, certainly compounds the fact that things just don't get built quick enough. So there's always going to be that supply
Well,
problem.
and you've got other aspects, the fact that Dan said there's no inheritance. So the reality is there's no pressure for people to sell, and therefore properties that would in a different market go on the market, go and being sold for tax reason, stays in the family generation after generation. That also explains why sometimes you walk into a certain street and there's a lot of abandoned, buildings, and that's because there's not that pressure. The second thing is particularly in our market, most buyers are cash buyers. the leverage is very low. Whether it's on the developer side, most of the developers that we work with are very little leverage, and it's more, if their leverage is by choice, it will be most funds and mostly their funds, and then the buyers. So what we've seen, for instance, 20 years ago in Spain, in our neighboring country, where you have this oversupply and then everything collapsed. That just cannot happen, cannot happen here. So you've got a lot of very strong fundamentals, here, and means that you'll always have that supply issue, which for buyers is a good, or for, I would say, asset owners is a positive thing.
So would you say then that the Portuguese market is a good place for an investor right now?
Well, I think it depends what you mean by investor. So if you are someone who's looking to buy a property and flip it within 12 months and having double digit profit, probably Portugal is not your playground. However, if you're looking at more long-term quality asset, where you would keep your property for 5 to 10 years, and it's more about stability or about diversification of assets, then I think, yes, Portugal can be a good market. And you've got to look at the market, structurally as a market. So home ownership is very high in Portugal. So you don't have as I said, not leverage. Land that people want is very, I've said that early on, is very slow. So you're very limited. So you're not going to have a lot of new supply coming onto the market. We don't have the cheap credit. We won't have this situation that we'll have in Spain. Now, yields are not fantastic. They're reasonable. So if you buy a property, you're looking at anything between 3 to 7 gross yields across your property. The national average is about 6 to 7. So if you've got a profile of get rich quick, Portugal isn't for you. It's more a long-term play, and therefore the type of property you're looking at is very important. So you've got to look at properties that are good quality, and that's where we come in when we help our clients with their property acquisition.
So what would you say was more attractive then from an investment point of view, or even just a buying point of view? Would you be looking at maybe new properties, or would you look at maybe an older property and need a renovation?
The answer to that. I think the old adage of I buy cheap, I renovate fairly cheaply, and then I resell, I don't think that's working anymore, particularly in Portugal. I said earlier, in terms of renovation price, we're talking 30 to 40%. And let's be very transparent. When you're a foreigner, these prices usually are even a little bit higher. So that has changed a little bit. The bureaucracy is slow. So I think if you're looking to build, or if you're looking to renovate, so on the renovation, you have to do it very smartly and understanding if your property has a ceiling. Don't come in and and then just spend extensively. If you want to go down that route, understanding that it's more a labor of love rather than an investment. I don't think that there's much space in terms of upside by renovating. So what we found is more and more international buyers are more looking at other turnkey product. Also because the quality of the new build is far superior to the old, to old properties, or older properties that have already been renovated. So I think that's where most of the international buyers are at the moment.
Maya, I've got just a quick question because from my side, we at DC Partners, we've been in Portugal for over 20 years, and there are very close relationships in between Portugal, the UK, and many other markets. In our case, for example, we work in 125 markets. We deal with 53 types of currencies. We have clients coming all over the place to Portugal for relocation, for investment, for many reasons. So I've heard before that the prices have been increasing over the years due to the predominance of these international clientele coming and investing in such a special place as is Portugal. Would you say that this has something to do with the high prices that we are seeing in the real estate market?
Well, first of all, thank you, Rachel, to give me an opportunity to bust that myth, and I'm really happy that I'm able to do so. So yes, since post-COVID, there is this very common narrative going around with it. Government says it, the newspaper says it, foreigners says it as well, is that the prices are high because of the foreigners. So I did a bit of an investigation because I thought, well, data's don't lie. Well, shouldn't lie. And it's interesting because when you look at the data, it gives more of a nuanced picture. So you'll be interested to know that nationally, international buyers only represent 10% of all the transaction. So what it means is 90% of the transaction are driven by local buyers, by Portuguese. Now, in certain markets, such as the Algarve or very central Lisbon, that goes up. Okay, so in the Algarve, roughly, we're talking about 24% of the transaction. In central Lisbon, and what I mean by central Lisbon, I'm talking about what they call the ARU, the urban rehabilitation areas. Okay, it's about between 23 and 33% of the transaction. Now, if we look at the Lisbon municipalities, that number really falls much, much below. And the majority of the transaction is still driven by Portuguese families, not expats. So in certain areas, yes, we can say that foreigners have a small influence, but in certain segment only. And it's in areas where you've got anyway limited supply, But I think the drivers are structural. And it's, and I've already mentioned some of these, and you'll see it's the same recurrent, I would say, challenges that Portugal faces. The supply, limited supply. Everyone's been to school, I've done basic economics, know that if you have little supply, that will have, an impact and will increase, increase prices. The slow planning. We talked about it. If tomorrow you're a developer and you go and you decide you want to build a building, you are not putting a hole in the ground for another 18 months to 2 years. The higher building cost. What we've seen is, we've spoken with developer in the Algarve, because they have labor issues, they have to bring workers from the north, which means that they have to house them in the Algarve. What do you think they're doing? They're not, swallowing these costs. They're passing on that cost onto the final price because it is a cost. And then what we've mentioned as well, it's a market where many owners have little pressure to sell. The inheritance tax, the high, home ownership, the fact that people are not indebted when they buy properties because it's mostly cash, cash buyers. All of these have, for me, more of an impact than the foreigners who come and live here. And I think where we are in a situation is you have a failure of governments who are not doing what it takes, to help with these structural issues, basically pointing the fingers to the easy target. So for me, it was thank you for giving me the opportunity to clear that out, because as a foreigner in Portugal, I certainly don't really want to feel that we are that much of a cause for concern.
We're part of the problem. We're not, and we're not. So, thank you. Right, Rach, let's move on to you now with one thing which does fascinate me actually is the sterling and its volatility at the minute, and how does that affect UK investors or home buyers at this stage, and what can they do to mitigate their risk right now?
Well, Joe, this year has felt a bit like watching the tide roll in and out. Just as you think sterling is settling, a new wave comes in. So soft job data, political noise, and whispers about leadership changes have all added pressure. For anyone planning Portuguese property purchase coming from the UK, that uncertainty can feel uncomfortable. One thing I always tell people is don't wait until the day you need it. Start speaking early, get clear on your numbers, understand what a 1 or 2% swing actually means for your plans. It's often more impactful than they realize.
For me, this is really, really important. If you need a mortgage, you wouldn't go and start looking at properties without knowing that you can actually secure a mortgage, and how much would that mortgage be. And I think the same mindset has to be with with currency exchange, and we do it with our client. We don't wait until they find the property and say, oh, now let's see how much you can save. We say plan early, because it can also affect the budget. And we've seen it with clients, particularly from the US, where when they started to plan, thinking of coming, they had one budget. By the time they made the decision, that budget wasn't the same anymore. So it's not just about little savings. It can really alter your project altogether. So I just wanted to make that point, because it's really important.
Yeah, we've seen as much as a 15% swing, especially with the American market. If we go back even like 18 months, maybe 2 years, I would say the dollar to euro was at least 20% swing. So these things really do matter.
Yeah, and I think the same thing can happen now with the with the UK.
Those planning large transfers, like Maya was stressing, like property payments, there are ways of mitigating this risk and the volatility of the market right now. And there is a lot going on. There are many, like the sentiment that there is currently from the market is shocking, and there are ways of actually protecting that budget that you set for your property purchase. And we are looking at cents of difference, and this means that, for example, on a 300,000 euro property, this can mean for you 9,000 euros. How long it takes you to actually make this, we were talking about yields. So we are targeting ways of actually maximizing our investment. So we have to try to mitigate this risk as well by looking at different ways of being less stressed about the currency market swifts. And there are ways like forward contracts or limit orders that target that preferred levels rather than waiting for the perfect day, like Maya was pointing out.
And if I also may add to that, and Zeev will probably confirm that whoever's trying to play accountant by themselves will probably end up giving a call to Zeev. Because they didn't know what they were doing. They went on Facebook group and tried to find answers by asking anyone and everyone what they could. And the same is for currency. You can use XC.com and try to time it. But when you have access to expertise, why not leverage that expertise so that you can have headspace for for something else?
Yeah, there's the whole psychology of money, isn't there? And, Rach, in your experience, what are these kind of behavioral mistakes that clients make when just dealing with exchange rates and moving money?
I think, that's a really good question, Joe. The biggest one is waiting for the perfect rate. Markets move fast, and emotional decisions often lead to missed opportunities or losses. So another is treating currency as an afterthought. So focusing on the property or investment first, and only thinking about the exchange rate at the very last minute. So taking an early advice brings a peace of mind and helps you make confident and well-timed decisions to avoid, again, these currency risk volatility of the markets in regard to your budget that you set from the very beginning.
And you really do see that even the smallest changes in policies, or even the build-up to policies, or once the budget is out, the kind of things that can happen to the pound. What do you foresee is going to happen to the pound in the up and coming months?
Yeah,
I know no one has a crystal ball, but
I know. It's kind of it's a difficult question to answer, but it is true that the emotional side is often underestimated. When sterling drops, panic sets in. When it rises, people freeze, waiting for just a little bit more. Both can cost more than the market move itself. So the most common mistake as well is trying to beat the chart. So let's see how this crystal ball works for me, instead of working out what rate actually makes your plans feasible, and on what's that that clarity is that, like Zeev was saying as well, get clear on if you want to move to Portugal or not. It's that clarity is there, everything becomes far less stressful. So the current market is, again, because we are still waiting for next week budget final decision, the mixed kind of information that we are getting from the government is just not helping UK investors in this current market. So with the weaker UK job data, again, political uncertainty, this is not helping the current market, and anything could happen. What we are facing right now is that potentially is not going to go any further than 1.14 GBP to the euro, and this is because of the current geopolitical circumstances that are in place in the UK.
Thanks, Rach.
I would relate, that to the investment mindset, because we often see that, we've got clients that come to us and, they say, oh, we want to make a good investment. And, when you dig deeper, you realize that a lot of the international buyers, they're not behaving like traditional investors. Their motivation is lifestyle. They want the plan B, more safety, more sun, a different rhythm of life. And what they want really to do is make sure that they're not being screwed. That's basically that. And, when you're not a traditional investors, that's where having this little component and giving that to, whether it's your financial advisors, your tax lawyer, whether it's your currency risk, that's also help in terms of the mindset and how you can make better decisions. We've got a client currently who's looking to move, and he's been planning his move for a year and a half, and now wants to renegotiate on the price because the pound's gone down. But we've been telling him for weeks the pound is going to go down, and it's a very interesting interesting situation, then he's looking at everyone, can you make my life better? And it really shows, if you don't make decision, particularly in this market where it's turbulent, yes, you can miss out, as you said. Oh, yeah, but if only it would have been a bit, high. Sometimes it's all about making the decision, and moving. And then if you cut it too short, then next time you'll make it up, a bit later. But I think when you don't make the decision, that's where you can end up losing out, big time.
Yeah. And just before we wrap up, and I will come back and just ask you all one last question before we go. Zeev, a question for you, and it's to do with the citizenship, because there's been a lot of panic around it recently with what's come out in the government in Portugal. And there's a lot of people that have already invested in this, and there could be retroactive, can you give us the outline of what has actually happened, like the facts, the cold hard facts of what has happened and what is going to happen, and some of the rumours, more of the rumours than anything else that you could quash?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to do that, and then maybe saying a few general words about uncertainty and the right way to deal with it. Yeah, so the government's passed the parliament. So the government leading the parliament passed a law that changes much of the citizenship laws. There's quite a bit to it. The most important and perhaps most interesting part is that now citizenship, the count towards citizenship is 10 years instead of 5, and it starts at the issuance of the residency card, and as opposed to the first application, which in practice probably expands it to for some people for a very, very long amount of time, because some people have been waiting 3-4 years for residency cards, so they could be almost on the verge of citizenship and now facing another 12 or 13 years wait in the most extreme of occasions. So where it stands, so the parliament voted. Normally, after parliament votes, the law goes to the president, and the president either signs it, vetoes it, or sends it to the constitutional court. Interestingly, this time, the president was in Angola. He was coming back, and before the president managed to get his head around this, perhaps maybe in an orchestrated way, who knows, the prime opposition party, which is the Socialist Party, sent this law to the Constitutional Court using an authority that's only been used twice before in history. And now it stands with the Constitutional Court. The issues pointed out by the Socialist Party are not yet fully known because the actual text hasn't yet been published. But what's been reported in media is that they've been complaining about the count from application, from the residence instead of application, but haven't actually complained about the 5 to 10 years retroactive change. Now, the government's been arguing this is not retroactive because Golden Visa is a residency program. It's not a citizenship program. Access to citizenship in 5 years was always a side benefit, what was never promised. And it's a different law, and hence it's not a retroactive change. The counter argument to this is that this is certainly how it's been advertised and promoted, including by the government. And short of retroactivity, there's the concept of legitimate expectations, which is not quite as strong as retroactivity, but is also a constitutional principle that needs to be protected. So there's an overarching argument that this is breaching the legitimate expectation. This is all legalese, right? Legal stuff. On a less anyway, the Constitutional Court has 28 days to decide. I think they'll probably knock off the application date, but maybe I'm just being optimistic. And then it goes back to Parliament. In the meantime, we're going to have presidential elections. That's probably before it comes back again. So it's all a big mess. I think from a reputational perspective, it's been communicated terribly. So including some government people saying we've intentionally waited with the processing of golden visas because we need to process poor people's visas first. It's morally correct to delay rich people's visas if you have poor people's visas that need to be to be processed. So that sort of language completely unnecessary. Generally, everyone was already here. So people that came on D7, D8 visas are they already live here, so maybe less bothered that they will need to wait longer. Though it's obviously a frustrating change for people that are hoping to reach for citizens in the near future. The people that really go nuts over this are the golden visa applicants that have already applied, because it's yet another change for the worse. There were almost 3 months of processing times when they applied in 2021, 2022. It ended up being years. They've been completely ignored. Some of them went to court. The IMA ignored the court decisions. Then they were told, you don't need to worry because we'll process from the application date and not from the residence card. And now they're told, oh, actually, a moment before you get it, now we're changing it backwards so that it will be the application date. So kind of everyone who's been caught up in this mess is very upset. It doesn't seem that the government particularly cares. Interestingly enough, and I'll close this in a bit and say a few things about uncertainty, but interestingly enough, none of this was planned for expats at all. It's a side almost an unintentional consequence of what is the government's attempt to respond to the far right rising due to low-skilled immigration of people that came usually without a visa at all and have applied for a visa after finding work in Portugal. There was such a route, and it's closed. But now, basically, there's this social pressure from very different types of groups of migrants, but because it's very difficult to differentiate between people from different groups, it's kind of applies to everyone. But the government doesn't actually have anything against either D7, D8 or the Golden Visa program, but everyone is sort of caught up in this. So yeah, that's where we are.
And I think that's very important, Zev, just to interrupt you there, sorry, but to make that distinguish between the actual visas and residency and citizenship. They are two separate things. I know, yes, you need one to get the other, but it's just to put the distinction between the two.
Yeah, I mean that. So and residence within 5 years, a permanent residence within 5 years is still a possibility. They would not change that because that will really be retroactive. So they would not change that for people that are already in the system. Whether changing the citizenship rules for people that applied for residency and relied on a certain framework of citizenship rules is fair or retroactive is it can be argued both ways. I personally think there's a lot of merit in the arguments that the two are tied together, particularly since the government changed the count for citizenship from the application date to residency. Instead of the residence card date. And I think that in that change, the government did tie those two concepts together. But yes, they are separate. They are in separate laws. And it's actually quite a complex matter. But the people that are caught up with investments that they can't liquidate and we're having certain expectations are certainly not happy about it. At all, and they are right to not be happy. And I know a lot of people that either are or were in Portuguese politics that think that this is wrong as well. I don't think that the primary kind of factions of political forces really understand just how bad these people have it. Or how bad it is for Portugal to send this message that you invest here and this is how you're going to be treated. I don't think it's good at all, and I hope it will be softened and changed. I think it will, but I don't know. We have to wait to see it through. Yeah, but I will say, and I'm asking, how can you? Some people say, I mean, we do golden visa work as well, and people ask us, so should you trust Portugal? And I've sort of formed my thoughts on this. I've lived. Portugal is the third country I'm living in. I now have the experience of loving countries and disliking their governments almost across the board. Portugal and is the oldest country in Europe. And I think it was the 13th century when Templar Knights asked the French king. They were very rich. I mean, I think they come from France, so maybe Maya knows the history. But they were the first bankers essentially, and they were very rich. They owned, I think, a third of Paris at the time, and they came to the French king, and they asked him to. So the French king came to them, and they asked him to fund another war, and they said no because you owe us too much money. So overnight, he arrested all of them, went to the Pope, got the Pope's approval, and executed most. The group that managed to run away went to Cyprus, got some money that they had stashed in Cyprus, and came to Portugal, and they essentially built the modern Portugal and made it very wealthy. So governments disappoint, and they do that all the time. All governments disappoint, and they do that all the time. And at the time, by the way, interestingly, because the Pope said no more Templar Knights, the Portuguese king of the time allowed them to change their name, essentially. So he said, yeah, we're closing the Templar Knights. Templar Knights are no more, but you can now call yourself the Order of Christ. So I'm going to take all your assets away from you, and I'm going to give you back the same assets now that you're called the Order of Christ a day later. So there are different governments have different policies at different times. The UK government's very disappointing at the moment. We have a lot of clients running away from Trump administration and quite unhappy. And the Portuguese government is very, very far from perfect. If you're going to trust one government, you're going to have problems. And things are dynamic and are changing. And the fact that those specific Templar Knights had some money stashed in Cyprus and were able to come to Portugal and apply for a D7 or the relevant equivalent of the time has been very helpful for them. So
I think Dan plays golf with them, actually. The same guys. They sound like one of Dan's clients. They've got money stashed in Cyprus and everywhere else. Hey?
Yeah. We haven't invented this at Fresh Portugal or at
Blevins. Yeah, Blevins.
This has been done. Yeah. This has been done thousands of years ago. Having a single country, single passport, single option, single place, relying on a single government is always going to be a very risky. A single currency, right, Rachel, is going to always be
diversification, very important. And I think that either Maya with France or myself, I'm actually originally from Spain as well. Apparently, we are doing great in Spain, and France is not doing that great. Germany is not doing that great. Portugal, well, it's been always a little bit under the radar as well. So I think that one of the reasons, in my case, I've done 2 international moves as well, and it wasn't really. I did not look at the Portuguese government. I was coming here for the lifestyle and for the security as well. As you were mentioning as well, Joe, people coming from the States or from the UK right now as well, tough times for the security aspects in some specific areas. So Portugal has been always a very secure, stable. I think that I will say that even though with the ups and downs, it's been kind of like stable over the time, and I think that gives a little bit of security, even though the policy changes now and again, as it does everywhere.
Yeah, I know Maya touched on it earlier, but I think for me one of the key aspects of Portugal is how small it is. 10 million people as opposed to 70 million in the UK and probably 50 million in Spain. The other European countries are still quite big in comparison. So I think that really does help Portuguese market. So on that note, I will wrap it up and I will ask you all the same question. And that is, if somebody is wanting to move, what should they do? When should they do it? Dan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on it earlier in the presentation, but for me, the importance is having that plan, the strategic plan. So having made a decision, or Zeev did sort of say, if it's a few years hence, get that plan in place, get it all in writing. I mean, Maya mentioned in the in the coffee shops, the golf clubs, the paddle clubs, there's always conversation about what somebody's doing, what somebody else is doing, but it's never going to be specific to you. So it's really important that if you're mapping out that strategic plan, that roadmap, as I like to describe it, you're not going to have any accidents on the way out or on the way into Portugal. And we need to mitigate them as far as possible. So get the plan in writing, make sure it's insured so that you're covered and protected as and when you make the move.
And Rachel?
I agree with Dan as well. A lot of people don't realize how simple tools or specialists in a certain topic can make life easier. So from my side, things like staying updated with personalized rate alerts or looking at different ways of desired exchange rates or holding funds securely until you're ready to move can take away a lot of the overwhelm. So it turns this a reactive process into something more structured, and it makes you feel confident. So having people that are keeping an eye on your best interest, on the markets, on your wealth, on how you can maximize the tax, so the tax efficiency, and to obviously find with you the right property and that fits the requirements is absolutely key.
Sorry, just a little side question as well, Rach. Let's say somebody wants to shift money and they want to do some forward planning. How long? So if I wanted to book changing pounds to euros, what period of time can I lock in a rate at?
Yeah, so basically that means a forward contract means to buy now and pay later. So you are able to lock in today's rate, and you are able to fulfill that transaction in 2 years' time. So anyone, I know that you recommended not to do any kind of like on bills, but for off-plan properties that maybe there is a period of time where that development is gonna finish in 2 years' time. It allows you to lock in the exchange rate today, so you can budget and pay little by little any kind of installment, securing the exchange rate. So it allows you to plan again in the future and knowing exactly how many pounds you have to pay for the equivalent in euros that you might require.
It gives you peace of mind, right? It really locks it in, gives you peace of mind whether the market moves up or down, but you know at that time that you've secured the price that at that particular time is what you needed. So that's fantastic.
That's right.
And Maya?
Yeah,
Same
and that's
question
something
to
that
you.
Sorry,
Rach.
that's something that it's not that you're only able to get it through a currency specialist. So no high street banks or any kind of new digital banks will allow you to do forward contracts, limit orders, rate alerts, monitoring the markets for you over time, and speaking with someone that will understand your specific requirements as well.
Thanks, Rach. Thank you. Maya?
You're going to have to re-ask the question.
The question is about timing, really, and what would your advice be to anybody looking? What should they start doing, and when should they start doing it?
Well, obviously, when you're moving abroad, there's lots of moving pieces. I think us on the real estate side, probably we come, on the back end of things. So they've got to make that people will want to make sure that financially and tax wise it makes sense. Obviously, Portugal, if your motivation, and Dan said it, I remember you said it on a different podcast that we recorded together, and you said it early. If your motivation is simply tax, there's probably other destination, for you. But if you want more of a lifestyle, better, a better life, a different pace of life, it's good. So when you look at Portugal as a destination, ask yourself what sort of profile you are, and I think Portugal it ticks the boxes for different profiles. So if you're retirees, semi-retirees, you get good standards of living. Your pound or your dollar or whatever will go a bit further, because yes, prices have gone up here. We're not, we also fallen victim of inflation. But in comparison with the rest of Europe, Portugal is actually still quite cheap. If you're young families, if you're people who are working, and you have ties, particularly professional ties with the UK, Portugal is great because you're in the same, in the same time, in the same time zone. So you can keep and fly back and, back and forth without having the jet lag or without having to take a late phone calls or very early phone calls. So that also works very well. And if you've got young kids, you can have them grow up, within an environment that feels safe. There's more and more international schools. Okay, granted, they are not cheap, but you also have, a solid public system if you wanted to put them in the public system. We know Portugal isn't perfect. No country is perfect. I think Europe, unfortunately, is going through a general decline, thanks to our politician, partly. But it's a bit of horses for courses. On the real estate, I would say not forget about the property, but concentrate on the lifestyle. And this is really a lot of the work that we do with our clients. And they're sometimes a bit taken aback. We don't even look at properties to start with. We're getting to know them to understand where they want to be, and the property is almost second to that. But generally speaking, I would say, having been in that market for about 4 years now, there's a lot of very unprofessional people. It's just a reality. So that's gonna annoy some people, but there's also very good professionals in the different industries. So make sure you've got the right team, whether it's on your tax, whether it's on your currency, whether it's on wealth management. There's lots of people out there, but they're not all equal. Same on in our industry, unfortunately. Have the right team around you to help you make the move confidently, because if you've got the right information, you can make the right decision. There's nothing worse than making a decision based on facts that are not true, are not accurate, and that can have really a lot of impacts. Now, on the real estate, you can say, well, I don't like that house, or I don't like that location, I'll sell and I'll go somewhere else. But on the tax, but it's still stressful if you've got to go through, that. But on the tax implication, wealth management, currency, you can lose money. So have that, and that's why we've put that that masterclass together, to show you that there's good people out there that can really help you put that project together and bring it to life.
Thanks, Maya. And Zev, finally from you, a couple of words just on timing and.
Yeah, so what the other said is gold. I'll just add on this that there's a big cultural difference between Portugal and the UK. I think we haven't really touched on that much, but the UK is a rules-based society. Normally, it doesn't matter who you are or how nice you are, and most transactions that you will do in your day-to-day life, you will have the same outcome if you come on a different day. And Brits tend to DIY things. Partially because of that, because there's a certain degree of predictability in doing things in a certain way. Portugal doesn't work like that. It's a much more a relationship-based society than a rules-based society. There are obviously rules, but they're not there to be followed all the time on a Monday, on a Tuesday by person A or person B in precisely the same way. But the relationships do matter. Who you know, how you treat them, whether they like you or not, whether you make the effort to speak the language, things like that. So it's just not a country to try and DIY. And people have a very, very different experience. If they come and they try to figure things on their own, they could be waiting on an IMA, a rainy day outside the IMA office at 6 a.m. and not being served. For day after day, or they can get they can get and pay for good advice from people who know how the system works and can help them. I can say I'm speaking from a position I don't. It really makes no difference to me, but I do see how different the experience is for people who come and they take time to create the right kind of relationships before they come. Makes a huge difference. So yeah, absolutely agree with everything that has been said before, but I think this is also important. It's a relationship-based society, and if you come with a good attitude and if you treat people well, even if you don't know the right people, you will have very different experience in Portugal than if some people come entitled. It doesn't work here.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So just to finish up, I'll summarise and I'll say that I'll go back to the point that Dan made right back at the beginning, and that is once you have the idea to move and to move country, then your planning should start immediately. And it isn't just about the move, it isn't just about the property, it's about putting the right team behind you for every single aspect of that move. And that's why we've given you the masterclass today, Plan B. Let's hope the budget is kind. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thanks to Dan, Rach, Maya and Zeev. You've been superstars. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
It's been great.